each project, I really think of the equipment and the physical infrastructure as the tip of the iceberg. And that underneath that, and what's not as maybe immediately evident, is all of the human capital and all the social capital that has to go into making these projects happen. The way that the industry has conventionally thought about that is kind of as a liability. Like the more stakeholders you have, the more people who have to be involved, the slower the decision is going to be made, the slower the process goes. But I think we really look at that as an asset and as a benefit to the projects, and especially as we move from the kind of low-hanging fruit projects to true electrification of everything and the aggressive goals that we've set for that by 2035 and carbon neutrality by 2050. Then we just actually have to be getting to these projects that have more people involved with them and have more complexity involved.
Welcome back to the Energy Nerd Show.
It's good to be here on the Energy Nerd Show.
Yeah, and guess what?
Do we have a guest?
We have a guest.
Oh, awesome.
Wonderful guest.
Who's our guest today, Jeannie?
Ben Underwood. Ben is a co-founder of Resonant Energy. How you doing, Ben?
Hey, doing good. Yeah, good to be here.
You want to tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm one of the original founders of the company. We founded the company in 2016. Kind of got my start with regard to energy projects, doing research projects for anaerobic digestion technology in Nepal and in China. Yeah, and so that's kind of where I cut my teeth, and then met my co-founder, Isaac. We both knew somebody at the Vermont Department of Agriculture who was working on AD projects up in Vermont. And we were like the only two people, certainly our age, and maybe possibly one of the only other two people he knew who were working on this type of technology. So he introduced us. That was kind of the beginning. And then he got pulled into working with a consumer energy cooperative called Co-op Power that was working on setting up low-income community shared solar projects around that time, 2015 or so, which was very popular in Massachusetts at the time. So we just kind of went in the deep end and started out there, eventually spun off Resonant as an independent company to focus on project development. And that was kind of the beginning of it.
How's it going with getting communities to benefit from solar? And how does Resonant approach that?
Yeah, I remember when we first started the company, at the time we were really focused on low-income homeowners and on houses of worship. Yeah, and at the time the idea of doing like nonprofit focused solar development, smaller sites and low-income homeowners, people would kind of laugh when we said that that's what we wanted to start the company to do. I don't think it was seen at the time as like a serious segment to work on. So much of the focus, was on, market rate residential or larger commercial sites or large greenfield community solar. So it's been very interesting, in the intervening years to see more and more starting at the state level focus on actually having income accessibility be part of the programs and having incremental incentives to drive investment for affordable housing, low-income customers, for nonprofits. And then, of course, what really changed things, as a kind of order of magnitude change was the Inflation Reduction Act that passed last year, which has the environmental justice tax credit adders. So it's been very interesting kind of going from, when we go to conferences and stuff like that, at first seeing no coverage and no segments on low-income inclusion to, about halfway through, there'd be like a little corner and it'd be like the low income corner. And I would be speaking to a mostly empty room to now. And like at Solar Power International and at the big conferences, it's one of like the three main tracks, one of the top areas of focus. And now people with money and investors are really starting to see the segment as a thing. So it's been very interesting to kind of have been there along the way for that transition.
That's so cool. 2 questions. How do you feel about the attention, and how has it changed your business?
Yeah, it's great to see more attention, obviously more resources between the environmental justice tax credit adders and the greenhouse gas reduction fund money, a separate tranche of funding in the Inflation Reduction Act. And, I do see there being a bit of a risk of the whole sort of machinery of the solar industry right now is really, industry does very well with straightforward projects that don't have too much complexity baked into them. And that can be on the technical side, but also on the sort of social side of the projects. You don't want to have, like, if you're a project developer, too many different stakeholders, too many people who can say no to projects. And I think that's part of why we've seen such a, almost exclusive focus on these greenfield projects. Because in that case, you might just have one landowner, one point of interconnection. It just makes everything simpler. Yeah. And so I see there being possibly a risk of trying to take that same mentality and apply it to projects that are really grounded in environmental justice or in energy justice, because necessarily these type of projects have more stakeholders and are not as suitable for the fast development, high volume, high margin approach. So I think there is like an evolution that's going to happen within the industry to actually make it so that the products that we're offering are suitable and responsive to the needs of this whole new class of customers. And I think you had a second question there of just kind of how it was going or how we were approaching it. Yeah, so for us, these days, our major focus is on affordable housing developers and affordable housing providers. That's about 80% of our total capacity under development right now. And so that has been very interesting, getting threaded into affordable housing organizations that have a lot of complexity themselves, just in how the housing developments are financed and how they engage with their tenants and everything like that. So it's been good. I would say like it is, at no point has it really felt like it's been easy going, but it is constantly interesting and the learning curve remains very steep, which mostly is enjoyable. Sometimes can be a little overwhelming, but it comes with the territory.
Are there any particular projects that you're especially excited about or proud of that are kind of recent or you're working on now?
Yeah, I have a few here. I think, can I share my screen and can show you some photos? Here's kind of a sampling of a few of our projects. This one is the Pine Street Inn. The Pine Street Inn is one of the largest, or maybe the largest, supportive services providers and supportive housing providers for homeless people or formerly homeless people. And so they're a really great organization. And this project is lowering their operating costs. And we worked with an independent investor to put together a power purchase agreement to make it so that they could get this array with no upfront cost. And I think a really cool feature of it also is that this particular investor, once they reach their target rate of return, so they get their principal back and then and some percent over that, I think it's like 7% or something like that, then they're actually going to donate the array to the customer, to the Pine Street Inn. And so they'll have full ownership of it. And rather than just being a power purchase agreement, then they'll get access to all the incentives and the full value of the electricity at that time. That's one we're really excited about. This one here is with the Discovery Museum in Acton. That's a children's museum, been around for a long time, I think over 20 years. And we set this up to be a community solar project where it has 5 or 6 different off-takers. Yeah, 6 total. 5 of them are nonprofits. And then the last is actually Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And so the Green Energy Consumers Alliance is buying power from this array and then donating the credits, the energy credits, at no cost to low-income customers. So we have that way of actually providing direct, no-cost bill savings to low-income customers through this project. And so here you can kind of see a chart that shows where the power is going: Acton Housing Authority, Neighborhood Affordable Housing, Haley House, and kind of the flow of payments from those different entities. And then here's one at Evans Crossing in Dorchester. This is an affordable housing provider there. Yeah, Mujeres Unidas Avanzando. This is a nonprofit that provides services to first-generation immigrants and people who don't speak English to get access to the benefits of public programs. And actually, they were our direct neighbor when our office was located in Dorchester. We saw them replacing the roof and just went up and talked with their executive director. And that's kind of how that project came about.
I like that approach.
Local and organic, right?
Just talk to people. Yeah. How would you compare the complexity of something like the most recent example where it's a single nonprofit that is housing community space or something compared to affordable housing, which is highly regulated? And I mean, different people are paying for whether it's one utility bill or separately metered. And, there's a lot of complexity.
What are the challenges and how do the projects compare?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think kind of across the board, just by working with nonprofits, and this is both for single sites and for affordable housing, generally speaking, you're dealing with a board or a committee as opposed to a single decision maker. So right there, the projects are fairly complicated as far as what the implications for the real estate are over the next 20 years. And, what are the likely savings going to be? Permitting, it's a big financial decision. So one thing we've really learned is across the board, even getting the institutions, the customers who we partner with, to have the organizational capacity on their side to be able to adequately think about these projects is one of the first challenges. And so one way we've approached that has been through initiatives like our STAR campaign, which I believe stands for Solar Technical Assistance Retrofit. And so we've gotten grant funding through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And then we're partnered with LISC Boston and the Massachusetts Association of CDCs to give technical assistance and capacity building grants to affordable housing providers so that they can then have dedicated staff work on these projects. And so they'll get $5,000 to $10,000 just to start thinking about it and to pay for that initial technical assistance. So that's been a pretty successful model, kind of in starting to address that basic capacity issue, making it so that nonprofits actually have the time to think about these decisions. So that's kind of across the board. There's definitely an increased layer of complexity that comes with working with affordable housing that goes beyond other individual nonprofits, in that the buildings themselves tend to have pretty complicated legal structures for the ownership of the assets, of the buildings. And so we'll have multiple different lenders, senior lenders, quasi-governmental agencies, as well as different equity investors, tax equity investors on the side of the real estate. And so one serious learning for us was kind of how to engage all of those entities in a way that is actually efficient and gets the project moving along. Because a lot of it is, especially for retrofit projects, the senior lenders and banks and stuff are really not set up to have to think about making changes to the real estate after the financing is already closed.
And it seems like a lot of the groups that you're working with, in terms of, advocacy and public interest, and Pine Street, and they're already stretched really thin with their primary mission, right? And then things that are kind of around the edges or important, but not the primary mission. Seems like it could push them. The people are stressed out and busy already, right?
Yeah, that's right. And and so there's different ways that people kind of come into the projects. I think one thing that's been very helpful has been in Boston, the building emissions reduction ordinance, BERDO, that came out recently, where now they're being benchmarked on their carbon emissions, and they actually have an obligation to reduce their carbon emissions. On-site generation is a very strong way to do that. So having the kind of corresponding policy environment where it's not just a nice to do thing, but where it starts to become a have to do thing, that has been very helpful, even for organizations that might otherwise, not be inclined to think about these things right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great to see someone really doing these kind of projects. You hear so much interest at conferences and talking to people, and there's definitely a lot of talking and hoping and policy level stuff. But see actual projects happening is
implementation, as we like to see. Yeah, it's really it's great to hear about.
Yeah. I think it's really important to have these visible, tangible examples, and like we sort of alluded to with the Mujeres Unidas y Avanzado project, or MUA, that it's actually our neighbor in that case. But I think with projects like this, and it's always easier and better if they're visible from the street, but even if they're not, each project, I really think of the equipment and the physical infrastructure is the tip of the iceberg, and that underneath that, and what's not as maybe immediately evident, is all of the human capital and all the social capital that has to go into making these projects happen. And I think that, like I talked about a little earlier, the way that the industry has conventionally thought about that is kind of as a liability. Like the more stakeholders you have, the more people who have to be involved, the slower the decision is going to be made, the slower the process goes. But I think we really look at that as an asset and as a benefit to the projects, and especially as we move from the kind of low-hanging fruit projects to true electrification of everything, and the aggressive goals that we've set for that by 2035 and carbon neutrality by 2050, that we just actually have to be getting to these projects that have more people involved with them and have more complexity involved. And I think there's actually a virtuous cycle that can emerge out of that, which is that we right now don't really have the political support to keep pushing renewable policy farther than it already is. I think seeing, for example, how narrowly the Inflation Reduction Act passed, or how long it's taking to execute reform at the level of ISO New England or different city level policies. It's all still happening too slowly. And so I think it's tempting to think we just need a technological solution to this. We just need to further lower the cost of batteries and the cost of solar, and that will kind of solve the issue. And I think that overlooks the fact that all of this is only going to happen if you have a really broad, really deep coalition of people across every sector of society who are advocating actively for further solar development, further renewable energy development. And so I think that in a way is actually the most important aspect of our work is like the physical and technical infrastructure is a great starting point, but those social coalitions and that deeper political capital that we build over time, I think is the most important thing.
So all the time and attention put into collaboration and building trust and all that is worthwhile for more reasons than just getting the project done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to put a finer point on it, I mean, I think there are even people now who are saying, with regard to the Inflation Reduction Act, are the requirements for having prevailing wage and for having union labor be part of it a distraction? Or are the environmental justice adders and those pushes, are those just kind of frills on the side of this that are actually distracting us from the fastest possible infrastructure deployment? And again, I think that overlooks the fact that these projects don't happen in a political vacuum. And so I think without these very direct ways of creating strong economic incentives for people who have been shut out of the industry up until now to have skin in the game and to care about what happens with these policies, that the policies are going to be taken away and that they're susceptible to being canceled when the next president comes into the office, et cetera. So I would say for Resonant's part, but I think also seeing the work that Climbable is doing and other organizations like ours, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, it's not like a good warm fuzzy feeling of we developed $10 billion of solar infrastructure and 1% of the savings are going to go to low income customers, and we get to feel like we did a good thing, but that it's actually like the most critical part of how we're pushing the narrative of who solar is for and who it serves, and really taking it from this niche industry that nerds like us care about, right? Which is like a very small fraction of the voting population, and making it something we really need to move towards. Like more than half of people in the United States care about it and have vested interest in it.
Well, cool. There's a lot of work to be done.
A lot. I was just thinking, we want to keep updated and hear and continue to hear about your progress, and let us know if we can ever, collaborate or communicate. It's just been really great hearing all this, hearing from you.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and thank you all for your work to make this kind of thing more visible.
Take care, Ben.
Bye.
Bye.